people who are eating unhealthy expect consequences. And people who are addicted to French fries and addicted to processed foods and so on and so forth, again, I'm going to say we can treat symptoms, but that's the problem. And we need to be able to treat those types of addictions also.
For sure.
So is this going to solve that problem? It'll help.
Yeah, it'll help mitigate.
It'll help mitigate some of the consequences of that behavior, but we still need to root out that behavior.
Mark Young, welcome to the Changing Lives and Destinies podcast. It is a pleasure to have you here today.
Natalie Needham, it is my pleasure to be here with you.
Okay, so you guys, I'm laughing not because it's funny to have him here, but just because the conversation, as you guys know, with my podcast, it's always, it's just always about the conversation before the podcast. Someday somebody's going to have to film that. So, Mark, tell me about yourself. How are you here? How are we here talking about what we're going to talk about, which is a very demanding but very cool device here.
I think you're going to love it. I hate the tell me about you question because I never like being the spotlight of something like that.
Okay, well, don't tell me about you exactly. Tell me about why you're here.
Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of background. So who am I? Yeah. I'm just a normal guy, but I'm a normal guy who's got this passion for better at everything. Right? Like if there's a way that I can be better at something, I want to find out what that is. So that has led me in a lot of strange directions, but one of them is in this world that we refer to as biohacking, although I hate that word. Yeah. Because it's about performance, right? It's about going to the next level of whatever it is that you're trying to do. And that's kind of where I live. I'm a marketing guy. I am actually, funny enough, I actually own and operate an advertising agency that really specializes in natural health and wellness. And years ago, I'd invested in a company called Zona Health. Okay. Because I believed in the science of it. And it's a medical device that has scientifically proven decade after decade after decade to lower blood pressure with natural means. Now, I'm not going to come in and tell you that I hate pharmaceuticals. I hate pharmaceuticals, though.
They have their place.
They have their place.
Every once in a while.
If I'm in the ER, I suggest people bring them out quickly. Yeah. But the reality is I think as a society, we've become too dependent on them. And I think it's kind of a lazy man's excuse for work.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay? In many ways. And I don't mean to knock anybody who's on any kind of pharmaceuticals because, again, they have their place. But if there's preventative ways that we can stay off of them, let's do it. Yeah. So I invested in this company, medical device company. Years later, I got a phone call from the board of directors and they're saying, look, we want to take this to the next level. We want to do new things. Would you be interested in getting on board with the management? And I'm like, I see where this is going. I'm like, so yes, 6 months. I'll give you 6 months of my time, but I have my own interests, right? Mm-hmm. That was about 5 years ago. And
6 months turned into.
Yeah. Well, what's fun about it is that I'll walk you through the device and show you what it is, but you'll love this, Natalie, because it's right up your alley because it is genuinely something that people can do, should do on a regular basis. Not only does it help with blood pressure reduction, again, scientifically proven. If anybody from the FDA is listening right now, I didn't say that, okay, because it's all over the place, but I'm not making a claim. Okay. But I'll tell you what it does. Mm-hmm. We actually are in the midst right now. I say that because we're actually in the midst of an FDA approval. Amazing. Because we have all of the science backing it. I'm on with the FDA on a regular basis because we really want to take this real major market. And that's the way to do it.
Well, listen, having spent just 30 seconds with it, I can see why. It's ease of use, right? So I mean, there's literally no excuse not to use something like this. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. So
it being
this, and if you can see what I'm holding here, and if you're just listening and not watching, I'll tell you, it kind of like we get the comparison to a checkout scanner or a Star Trek phaser. Like those are the comparisons that we get, but it's just very ergonomically fits in the palm of your hand. But what the device does is it actually uses a unique algorithm that uses what we call your maximum voluntary contraction, your MVC. And using that maximum voluntary contraction, it has you squeeze it as hard as you can just to get your strength for the day, because all of our strength is different in the morning, in the evening, day by day, based on resilience and recovery. So it gets your calibration on your right hand, gets the calibration on the left hand. And then it has you do what we call isometric exercise. And isometric, of course, being the terms for equal measurement, meaning consider it like a wall sit or a plank or something where you're holding the exact same static position for a period of time. Optimal The length for a plank, by the way, you know how long that is?
60 seconds?
120 seconds, 2 minutes.
Ooh, 2 minutes.
Perfect plank is 2 minutes. Any longer, you start to actually get diminishing returns. Anything shorter, and you don't actually maximize. Coincidentally, Zona actually uses 2-minute cycles as well.
Yeah.
So you get the calibration, and then it has you do 2 minutes on your right hand, 2 minutes on your left, and then repeat. So it's under 12 minutes. But what happens scientifically, and this is, I love the science, the nerdy stuff on this. Because
the science is the thing.
But
technology. Can I just interject one thing for the audience? Is this is nowhere near as hard as a plank. No. So before you guys go running for the hills saying there's no flipping way I'm doing anything like a plank for 2 minutes, this is the thing you're going to sit on your couch and do, or at your desk, or, well, not while you're driving because you kind of have to pay attention, but but literally, like, you won't break a sweat. It doesn't hurt. It's remarkably not strenuous for the outcome that you get. So,
and our target audience. No, that's a great point, because our target audience, we find the majority of the people who buy this product are 55 plus. It's a true statement, and the older the person, the more targeted the demographic gets, and part of that is because hypertension tends to coincide with age.
Yeah.
And that's age-related hypertension. And, you know, we see that just based on arteriosclerosis, right? Over time, the endothelial lining of the arteries ends up hardening. When that happens, what happens is that the endothelium actually regulates blood pressure in the body. When the endothelium hardens, it loses its ability to recognize that the blood pressure is elevated. So it's as if your body, think of it like a thermostat, right? If a thermostat doesn't realize it's hot in the house, it's not going to turn on the air conditioning.
Correct.
The endothelium works the exact same way. If it doesn't know the blood pressure is elevated, it doesn't do anything to regulate. So what happens is your body loses its ability to self-regulate because it loses its sensing mechanism to actually recognize the problem. And then blood pressure elevates. And what happens? Standard of care for any physician is, if you walk in with elevated blood pressure, you will be recommended to go on some kind of antihypertensive.
Yep.
And it is standard of care, meaning
at least one.
Correct.
My mom was on 5 at one point.
My grandfather, who recently passed away, was on 5.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind. 5 medications to regulate blood pressure. For the same thing. And the side effects just all over the place. And
100%.
Eventually he ended up dying because his kidneys gave out.
Well, because they were exhausted. Yeah, exactly.
And so you get into these types of situations where people age, they don't realize it. We've, as a society, I would say, just accepted some things are just normal. You know, I'm older, my blood pressure went up. That's normal.
Well, your doctor, unfortunately, your doctor will often say to you, it's part of aging. It's all good.
Absolutely.
Just take this medication. And sometimes the medication is needed. But what if you could do something to prevent that in the first place? And this is where
or use the medication as an intervention while you're fixing the problem.
Yeah.
Because I don't want your blood pressure to stay up for a period of time while you solve the problem. Bring it down, solve the problem, and then you won't need the medication anymore. So with this, what we're doing is we're actually putting the body back to its own state of self-regulation, right? When the sensor goes back on, meaning that endothelium softening, the body's able to do it. The body is so resilient. Like, it was made to live. It fixes itself in ways that we don't even understand yet.
100%.
And this is one we do understand. But the problem is getting to that standard of care thing that I was saying. Like, a doctor's telling you to go on antihypertensives because they're going to get sued if they don't. I mean, literally, if they don't recommend a high blood pressure to you, you have a lawsuit.
100%.
You know, and it reminds me of, like, you know, you go through a drive-through and it's like, if you don't get a receipt, your meal is free. And I'm like, this is what our healthcare has become. Like if you don't get a recommendation for a prescription, there's a lawsuit waiting. And it's like, that's not okay. Like, how do we get these types of interventions in the hands of people, literally in the hands of people, to get these problems de-escalated before they turn into 5 medications, right?
Love it. Okay, so how does this do it? So how is it, how am I holding a little, it looks like a little joystick that a kid might use for a video game or something. How is this joystick possibly going to have an impact on my blood pressure?
I'll tell you a little bit of background story on it, funny enough, because it actually was developed on accident in a study at the U.S. Air Force. That was a doctor by the name of Dr. Wiley, was brought in to figure out how do pilots not experience G-force blackout in fighter jets. Funny enough, this was actually back in the 80s, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
And it's shaped like a joystick because it literally was designed like the joystick that pilots a plane. That's
so
actually,
cool.
It's an intentional thing.
Yeah.
And what happened with it was he was studying to find out how do they stop them from going into G-force blackout. And what G-force blackout happens when blood pressure goes too low, person passes out for a period of time and then comes back to consciousness. And that happens with many pilots. Okay, not commercial airline.
Pilots. Yeah.
Not commercial.
The fighter jet
but
guys.
in fighter jet types.
Which is still a problem because it's a really expensive piece of equipment.
Well, yeah, and a life.
And a life.
So they were trying to solve that problem. And what he found is that over the course of all this data, he kind of took all this data and went, wow, that's weird. So they finished their study, which did not solve this problem. And then later he's like, that's weird because we're trying to stop people's blood pressure from dropping going into G-force. But over the period of the study, he noticed every single pilot's blood pressure had lowered. And he's like, well, why is their blood pressure lowering? And he realized it was from the grip that they had on the joystick during that time, that they held it at a very static measurement. So for about 10 to 15 years, he researched this and found out that using isometric therapy, again, that equal measurement of holding a device like this, what they ended up finding was that it lowered blood pressure. Well, the science behind it, let me explain. Two things happen. First of all, there's a short-term and a long-term effect. Short-term effect is doing any kind of isometric exercise is a nitric oxide release.
We love nitric oxide.
Right. We all love nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is like a miracle molecule. And nitric oxide is a vasodilator. So as a vasodilator, blood vessels obviously widen, pressure goes down, much like releasing the kink in a garden hose, right?
Yep.
So that's a great feature right there because in the short term, you're gonna see this natural nitric oxide release. Great. Love that. Long term, what's happening though? What's happening is that when your muscle is actually in a static hold, okay, plank, wall sit, grip, anything, what happens is it wants to naturally spasm, right? That spasm, actually the only way for a muscle to stop from spasming is the release of sodium from the cells.
Okay.
Well, in every cell, you obviously know this, there's got to also remain a balance of sodium and potassium.
Correct.
Those two things must stay in balance at a cell at all times. So if I'm forcing sodium out of a cell to stop a spasm, I'm also forcing potassium out so that the balance remains. When the potassium from the cell actually is released, it must pass through the endothelium. Well, we talked about arteriosclerosis, which is the hardening of the arteries, and the endothelium is the lining of those arteries. As potassium passes through that endothelium, potassium is the only thing that softens it. Picture it like a dried sponge. As potassium passes through that sponge, it softens the sponge.
Nice.
When the sponge softens, the regulator turns back on and the body goes, wait, my blood pressure's elevated. We got to fix this.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen after one time. What we notice using the device is usually it's like a 6 to 8 week period of use, maybe 3, 4, 5 times a week. We tell people use it as much as you want just because you will skip naturally.
Yeah, I mean, if you get into a daily use, then you might skip the day. If you tell people 3 to 4 times a week, they'll be lucky to get it in once or twice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Patient compliance is always the problem.
It's all about habit.
So we tell people just make a practice of trying to use it every day. And then if you don't some days, you're not doing yourself any damage. Our clinical trials were all done on 3 times per week.
Okay, so that's your minimum effective dose.
Minimum effective dose would be 3 times. We recommend planning for 5. It's easy to say do it on the weekdays.
Yeah.
Because that way you don't have to do it on the weekends. But again, as you demonstrated, while using it, you're literally just sitting on the couch watching TV, squeezing it in your hand. You got to kind of pay attention to it, but the algorithm is set in such a way that it knows exactly what the effectiveness is. You don't squeeze it at your maximum contraction.
No, that's the thing, guys. You're not
calibrates.
Yeah.
And then it holds you at a percentage of that maximum contraction based on what it calculated is the right amount for you. And then there's a range. So there's a margin of error, if you will, that it's trying to get you to hold it at an exact range. And as long as you stay within a percentage of that range, you're fine. But if you start veering out of there, you remember where it said hold.
Yeah.
But if you release it just a little bit, it tells you, nope, squeeze it more.
Yeah.
And if you squeeze it a little too tight, it says, no, squeeze it less.
I know.
And it coaches you through holding in that optimal zone. And then when your treatment session is over, it tells you what percentage of time you actually stayed in the optimal zone. And anything over 80%, you actually got the effectiveness of the exercise. If you got less than 80, we tell you just do it again. There's no harm in doing it twice.
Nice.
So, but the device itself, the science behind it, Natalie, is... Again, I'm not even going to say that it's groundbreaking because it's not that complicated, right? It's like
it's groundbreaking in terms of
Nobody knows it.
The simplicity of it, right? That's groundbreaking. Because, people get told, to manage blood pressure, you got to exercise, which is true. I mean, exercising is an amazing way to manage your blood pressure, but to be able to do something this targeted and affect your blood pressure, you can still go out and exercise.
Absolutely.
But this is so much more specific, not to mention that for the population of people who haven't exercised in the last however long.
Well, and I'll add to that. I mentioned that our target demographic on this doesn't have to be an older person, but we notice it's a lot of older people because if you find somebody, and I hate to say it, but a lot of older people become very sedentary.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's with good cause, right? Like I can't run, I can't go to the gym, like I'm stuck at home, whatever the reason is. This can be done on the couch, and you're getting the cardiovascular effect of it is the same as running up and down the stairs 3 times.
Wow.
I mean, it's actually a cardiovascular workout, and you're not sweating, you're not struggling, you didn't have a problem using it. I mean, you're in good health, but even a person who's not can use it. It's no big deal.
I have a question. Would someone who's like in a wheelchair, for example, because these people have notoriously massive issues, right?
Correct.
With blood pressure, with circulation. So even someone in a wheelchair would benefit from something like this.
We literally have had calls from people saying, I only have one arm. Can I still do this? Because I can't do a left arm, right arm. I only have a left arm or whatever. And yeah absolutely.
So do you have any stories for me? Any anecdotal stories you can share? And if you can't, that's okay. But
no, I'm just trying to think through them. I mean, the reality is that the device itself, I've got tons of stories of people who are just mystified that this actually worked for them, right? And I mean, literally people, one of our good partners now, he actually does a lot of stuff. And as a matter of fact, I got in contact with him. The first time I ever met him was I was a guest on Dave Asprey's podcast and was talking about this. He actually had recently been diagnosed with high blood pressure and is a biohacker himself and all into everything. And it was funny enough because he reached out to us and was like, look, I heard you on Dave Asprey's podcast. I bought one of these. I wanted to find out if this actually worked. And he's like, it worked. He says, I'm blown away. And he goes, I've been on all these medications over years. I ended up using this thing. It actually worked. I had to call and ask you, would you be on my podcast? Because I want to tell people about this. I'm like, of course, whatever. And what's funny is that he actually is he's a formulator for nutraceuticals and all this other kind of stuff. Just super cool guy. We've become good friends. But again, it's stories like that. He understood that this type of science works, right? Because he's into natural health. He understands what's going on behind the scenes. The hardest thing that we have, and I think this is true industry-wide in the natural health and wellness space, there's a very westernized medicine culture, particularly in the United States, that is very pharma heavy. It's very, if the doctor says it, it must be true heavy. The problem is we can only teach what we know.
Yeah.
And you go into a physician and you're only going to learn what the physician already knows.
Yeah.
And if there's things that are outside of the physician's purview or things that person just doesn't know, how does the doctor tell you something other than that? Sure. And we really do. We look up to medical professionals, and I love, doctors. There's no knock to any of that. But we need to open the curtains a little bit more to there are other things that are not just Western medicine based. And I think as a culture, we tend to not accept that stuff easily. And I think, like I told you, my own grandfather died of kidney damage and taking 5 blood pressure medications. Why? Because even with a person like me that close in his life, I couldn't get him to do this kind of stuff because it's anti-cultural, right? It's countercultural to do it.
It's a bit mind-blowing, right? Like to the average person. And I mean, what's amazing about this is it taps into the body's cellular signaling systems. Like this is about getting your body, and you mentioned this earlier. This is tapping into the body's ability to heal itself. And we suffer sometimes as a society of not acknowledging or being able to tap into those systems. And what has anybody got to lose? Where nobody's saying 100%. Throw away your blood pressure medications when you buy this. Quite the contrary. Wait till your doctor says to you, oh, I think we might need to lower your dose a little bit. And so the magic happens.
And that's exactly right. When people are on blood pressure medication, any kind of antihypertensive, and they start using the device, our advice to them is make sure you stay in lockstep with your prescribing physician, because the reality is that you may not need that. You may, over the course of the next month or two, be overdosing on your hypertension meds now, because the truth of the matter is if your blood pressure goes down naturally, you don't need all the medication you once needed. And you need to make sure that you're titrating off of that. Otherwise, your blood pressure could drop too low.
Yeah.
Because this device is not ever going to drop your blood pressure too low, because it's leaning into your body's ability to self-regulate.
Okay, so I was going to ask that question, which is really key. You can't overuse this and drop your blood pressure to hypotensive. It'll just allow your body to come back to its natural set point of homeostasis where it needs to be.
And we get people who ask us questions like, well, my blood pressure is naturally low. Why would I use this? And my answer is, your blood pressure is naturally low. You still need a cardiovascular system that knows how to self-regulate. It's not doing you any harm. It's almost as if you bought a treadmill and you're asking, when would it be appropriate for me to use this?
Now.
Daily.
Like now would be good.
Now would be good.
Well, what about people who have low blood pressure? That's a really good point.
So,
can this help to like for people whose blood pressure is too low? Have you seen or have you studied how this might help the body to regulate better that blood pressure?
So I can anecdotally support and say that people with low blood pressure experience no negative from using it, because it's just like doing a workout.
Yeah.
But again, I will get to hypertension is a symptom.
Oh, that's the killer for sure.
Hypertension is not the problem. Hypotension,
which is the low blood pressure,
also a symptom. It's not the problem. And what needs to happen is that we need to stop treating symptoms and actually start treating the underlying reasons why something is wrong. If your blood pressure is high or low, something else is going on in the body. And I will say I disagree with it, but hypertension is a condition nowadays. We've actually created that and caused it a disease. And I would argue and say hypertension is not a disease. It's a symptom telling you there's something else going wrong in the body. And if we treat the symptom, we're never actually treating the underlying problem.
100%.
And that's so true of so many things that we are labeling nowadays. And I won't get into details on other things. We'll stick to this. But we're labeling so many things diseases when in fact they are symptoms of other underlying problems. And what's so sad about that to me is that we have people walking around, they're just walking wounded, who think that they're solving a problem when in fact all they're doing is masking a problem by treating a symptom. And we're actually getting to the root of a problem and ferreting out the actual issue, which is that endothelial hardening. And if we can get to that, the body self-regulates. The body goes back to normal. And that's all we're trying to do. Just let the body do what the body knows how to do. Quit trying to, put in some kind of surgical workaround. Like, let's just let the body do what it does. It does it really well when you leave it alone and create the environment that it's allowed to.
Just get out of the way. Okay, so we have a listener who's sitting there going, so I kind of have this salt addiction. I really love processed foods and packaged foods and French fries and things like that.
Why do I feel judged right now?
but I feel like to a point, like this will help. But you also want to get all these other pieces in line.
Yeah.
As well. Like, like all of these root cause solutions that, we're going to be talking about a lot over the next day. And this is the first conversation, which is perfect for kicking it off.
Right.
We still have to do the work. We still have to lean into the proper lifestyle decisions.
Absolutely. To the person who has a salt addiction, that doesn't bother me. I actually believe that salt is a very healthy part of your diet.
Oh, for sure.
And the people who go on sodium restrictions are hurting themselves, to be honest with you. But again, that's what we tell people if their blood pressure is too high. Within reason, obviously. I'm not suggesting salt licks at the kitchen door, but maybe for horses. I don't know. But the reality is that people who are eating unhealthy expect consequences.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And people who are addicted to French fries and addicted to processed foods and so on and so forth. Again, I'm going to say we can treat symptoms, but that's the problem. And we need to be able to treat those types of addictions also.
For sure.
So is this going to solve that problem? It'll help.
Yeah, it'll help mitigate.
It'll help mitigate some of the consequences of that behavior, but we still need to root out that behavior.
I love it. So is there anything else on the market like this? I mean,
literally nothing.
Nothing, right?
Which shocks me, to be honest with you. But there are other things that talk about the reduction of blood pressure and ways that you can naturally do that through, breathing exercises and so on. All true. Because breathing exercises actually will increase, particularly mouth breathing will actually increase nitric oxide production.
Is it mouth breathing?
In through the nose, out through the mouth.
Oh, in through the nose. Okay, because the nose has to get involved.
Correct. Yeah, in through the nose, out through the mouth is a great breathing exercise for nitric oxide release. Does that lower blood pressure? Sure. That's the short term, as we just talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Short term is that nitric oxide release, which this does through a different medium. Long term still needs to be ferreting out the underlying problem, because nitric oxide, I can take in a pill, I can take in a drink mix, I can get nitric oxide through breathing, I can do any number of things to get nitric oxide release. But again, once that nitric oxide works its way through the system and dissipates, you're back to the original problem.
Right.
And this is actually getting to the root of the problem, which is actually solving the body's self-regulatory system. Yeah. And if we don't get the body to a point that it understands how to self-regulate, you will not get rid of the problem. You will just keep trying to solve a symptom.
I love it. What advice do you have for individuals who are, trying to be proactive about their health? They want to live longer. I mean, this is the longevity tool. This is
100%.
I mean, of all the longevity tools that we have at our disposal, this, I don't know, it seems to me
seems to be an obvious addition to the, it's an obvious arrow in the quiver. And I lean back, Dave Asprey's book about what are the major causes of a person's death, going into, is it cardiovascular? Is it diabetes? Is it dementia? Like what's happening? There's 5 real reasons that a person's going to die, right? He actually talks about this in his book and talks about, this is just a way to get past one of them.
Yeah.
Like this is just an easy thing that a person can do on a somewhat regular basis to just ensure cardiovascular health. Like there's no reason not to. My advice to a person who's really trying to get in health, and I'm going to speak to the people who are kind of on the cusp of doing that, as opposed to the people like you or like me or your audience for the most part who's already knees deep in this stuff, right?
For sure.
But the reality is my passion is for people who are not knees deep. Like my passion is for the people who are, that biohack curious crowd who are like, what is this stuff? Like there's got to be something,
What's the catch?
Right. The person who just started taking their first supplement and is now like, oh, I feel a little different. Like it's those folks who are trying to lean into the obvious things, and they're not ready for doing stem cell treatments, right? They're not ready to go spend hours in a red light chamber. But they've heard of cryotherapy, so maybe they're cold bathing periodically, and they're kind of dipping their toe in this stuff. My advice is just keep leaning in, do the easy stuff, because if we try to take on too big of a piece of this at a time, like again, I'm knees deep in it. You're a peptide expert, right? No one's going to start getting into natural health and become peptide experts overnight. Zona is such an easy thing for a person to add to their just normal routine, because you're literally squeezing a little medical device.
That's it. You're just squeezing the joystick, guys. It's actually kind of fun.
It is. It's seriously. And what it actually does is it actually requires what we call active meditation, because there are some people like me who are just naturally prone to distraction.
Yes.
That sitting and meditating and doing breathing exercises, like I'd rather take a punch to the face than sit for a half hour doing breathing exercises. And I know that's an insult to like Travis Steffens and these guys who like spend their entire lives in it. I'm like, dude, I admire you so much. But it's like, it's not my thing.
Right.
This focuses me for that good 12 minutes. And it's because I have to focus on this.
Yeah. That's good.
And
active,
that,
we can call it active meditation.
Absolutely. That's what I said. It's an active meditation. It forces me to concentrate on something rather than trying to get me to concentrate on nothing.
Yeah. Which is almost impossible for most of us.
Absolutely. And for people like me, prone to distraction, I am 100% focused on this one thing. And it almost becomes that flow state experience for me. And what I find and again, this is totally off topic from blood pressure, but what I find is like, if I'm doing this for 12 minutes and it takes all of my thought to pay attention to it, to try to get that 100% score, because if there's something worth doing, it's worth overdoing.
Yeah.
It gets my attention. It puts me almost in that flow state situation that everything I do, even immediately afterwards, is done better.
Love it.
Because my brain is already in that balanced space. And I love that. It's such an easy thing for a person to add to their repertoire of health routine that it's almost silly not to.
Oh my God. I mean, we're coming up on time, so I have to close, but I can almost see something like this being promoted by insurance companies someday if the world, goes the right way. So Mark, thank you so much. Thank you for, stepping stepping outside the realm of advertising to no, I mean, I can imagine that this is changing and saving a lot of lives. So thank you so much for what you do and for being here today.
Can I give your listeners a quick one too? And I'll tell you, please visit us online. Go to it's zona.com, zona.com. We even put a coupon code in there. It's NAT24, NAT24.
Okay.
And it's $100 coupon for anybody who wants to try the device.
Love it.
Use it. It's got a 90-day money back guarantee, so there's nothing risked. Like, it's almost silly not to try.
Yeah.
But NAT24 is $100 off at zona.com for people who want to try it, because I mean, who's more convincing than you?
Well, actually, you. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been great.
Thank you.